Imagine you're just sitting in your living room, right?
Yeah.
And the front door bursts open. A total stranger just plops down on your couch, grabs the TV remote, and starts loudly listing like every single mistake you've ever made in your entire life.
Wow. Yeah, you'd call the cops
But
immediately.
exactly, you'd want them out of your house right that second. But well, what if that stranger is actually the voice in your head right now?
Oh, man.
What if the thoughts bouncing around in your mind aren't actually you? Like, what if they're more like uninvited guests who have just, completely taken over the house?
It is a deeply unsettling concept when you really pause to consider it.
Right.
Because we are so incredibly accustomed to believing that the voice in our head is, well, the core of who we are. We think, I am the one speaking those thoughts.
Like it's our truest self.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But the psychological framework we're examining today suggests something entirely different. It suggests that, for the most part, we are basically hostages to a squatter who has somehow convinced us that they actually own the property.
And that, right there, is the mission of our deep dive today. We're pulling insights from a really thought-provoking lecture by the spiritual teacher and author Eckhart Tolle,
Right.
and we're going to explore the hidden architecture of the human ego, tracing how, a simple, seemingly harmless passing thought can completely snowball into a manufactured identity.
Yeah, and how it scales up, too.
Yes, exactly. How it becomes collective mental viruses, and even how it fuels these extreme mass-scale ideologies. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with this core premise from Tolle, the idea that thoughts are actually energetic entities.
Yeah, so think of thoughts not as just like abstract nothingness,
Mm-hmm.
but as actual energetic entities with a very specific lifespan.
Okay.
Some thoughts are completely short-lived, like you think, I need to buy milk,
Right. You go to the store, you buy the milk.
and the thought dissipates. It has fulfilled its brief lifespan, it fired a few neurons, and then just vanished. But other thoughts, particularly those that are, charged with heavy emotion or personal history, they don't dissipate.
They stick around.
They get completely lodged in your mind. They take up their abode there, as he puts it.
So wait, why do certain thoughts stick while others just vanish? Like, what makes a thought lodge itself in the first place?
It really comes down to emotional charge and ultimately identity. If a thought is attached to a feeling of, say, pride or anger or victimhood,
Like holding a grudge.
exactly, it carries a much heavier energetic weight. It starts creating a loop, and the brain actually physically reinforces those neural pathways the more you dwell on them.
Wow.
So the danger really begins when these lodged, permanent resident thoughts become the foundation for who you think you are. You stop observing the thoughts, and you start living completely through them.
And when you genuinely believe you are your thoughts, you are trapped in the ego.
Precisely. And the primary survival mechanism of this ego is self-assertion.
Self-assertion.
Right, because this identity is essentially made of fragile, invisible thoughts, right? It constantly feels the need to prove it exists.
It has to defend itself.
It's terrified of just disappearing into nothingness. So self-assertion becomes its full-time job. This manifests as the constant burning need to be noticed, like, look at me. And crucially, the desperate need to be right.
Which means someone else has to be wrong.
Always.
It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. You start with this tiny, harmless snowflake of a thought, maybe just, I don't know, a passing opinion about a movie you saw.
Sure.
But because of this psychological need for self-assertion, that snowflake gathers momentum. It picks up a need to be validated, a fear of being ignored, maybe a desire to feel intellectually superior.
Yeah, it packs on all that emotional weight.
And before you know it, it's a giant, heavy boulder of identity. And you are entirely trapped inside of it, just rolling completely out of control.
You're trapped inside the boulder, but the crazy part is you believe you are the boulder. You've completely lost sight of the fact that you were originally just the mountain the snow was falling on.
Oh, that's good.
You are the consciousness observing the thought, not the thought itself.
Okay, let's bring this into modern daily life, because the source makes this fascinating historical connection here to the myth of Narcissus.
Oh, right, the Greek myth.
Yeah, Narcissus is the beautiful young man who leans over a pond, sees his own reflection in the water, and just falls madly in love with it. He's so captivated by his own image that he simply wastes away staring at himself. Like he literally starves to death because he's paralyzed by his own reflection.
It's basically the world's earliest selfie.
Exactly. But, I mean, the crucial update for our modern era is that we no longer have to wander through a forest looking for a still pool of water.
Right, we have that pool of water right in our pockets.
We do.
The smartphone is the modern pond, and platforms like Facebook or Instagram, those are the reflections we stare into, except it's actually much more complex than a simple reflection.
How so?
Well, with this technology, millions of people are actively manufacturing, editing, and polishing a conceptual self-image.
So, what does this all mean for us? Like, wait, hold on. Are we saying anyone who posts a beach picture or, a life update is trapped in their ego?
Whoa.
Because that feels like a bit of a stretch. Isn't sharing our lives online just a fundamental human way of connecting with friends and family?
Oh, absolutely. It's not the actual act of posting the picture that's the problem here. The trap is entirely about unconscious attachment.
Unconscious attachment.
Right. It crosses the line into toxic self-assertion when you depend on the external validation of that image to feel a sense of self-worth.
Oh, I see.
If you post the vacation photo simply to share a moment of joy with your grandmother, that's one thing. But if you post it and then, you anxiously check your phone 50 times an hour to see who liked it.
We've all been there.
Yeah, or you feel a deep sense of despair or jealousy if someone else posts a better vacation photo, that's when you've crossed into ego.
So you are no longer using the tool. The tool and the conceptual identity it houses is using you.
Exactly. You aren't just looking at yourself, you're building a character. You're tweaking the lighting, choosing only the moments you look happiest, the achievements, the perfect angles.
The highlight reel.
Yes. You are projecting this highly curated mask out into the world. And the tragic irony the source highlights is that living through a fictitious conceptual sense of self inevitably leads to unhappiness.
Because it's fake.
It has to lead to unhappiness because it isn't real. It's a really heavy, fragile mask to wear all day. And maintaining it is exhausting.
But the irony is, what does the ego do when it starts feeling that creeping exhaustion and unhappiness? It doesn't take the mask off.
No, of course not.
It assumes the mask just isn't shiny enough yet.
Right.
Goes back and polishes that false image even more. It posts more. It seeks more likes. It's just a tragic feedback loop.
And that feedback loop is really just the mild, individual, everyday version of this egoic self-assertion.
It's a starter pack.
Yeah. Where this exploration gets genuinely terrifying is when we look at what happens when this desperate search for identity goes looking for something much bigger than social media likes.
Right.
When digital validation isn't enough to fill the void, the personal ego scales up into the collective ego.
We mentioned earlier the ego's absolute necessity to be right, which inherently dictates that someone else must be wrong.
Yes.
If you take that individual mechanism and scale it up to a societal level, the ego loves to identify with massive prepackaged belief systems.
Like political movements or religions.
Right.
And a vital distinction is made in the text here. A religion that has lost its actual spiritual dimension is no longer really a religion. It is simply an ideology.
It becomes rigid.
Exactly. It stops being about an internal experience of the divine or, a set of guiding moral principles, and instead it hardens into a rigid bundle of thoughts used to bludgeon others.
It becomes a tool for the collective ego to assert its superiority.
Yes. And the source points to the radicalization of young men as a prime, tragic example of this happening in real time.
When you look at why this radicalization happens, it's really about the mechanics of that internal void you mentioned.
Right. Imagine a young man who feels deeply alienated by society. He feels invisible.
He looks around and just feels the emptiness of modern consumer culture. He feels he isn't respected, he has no place.
And to the ego, being invisible is basically akin to death. This creates a terrifying internal vacuum. So the ego, desperate for survival and just any sense of identity, goes searching for an anchor.
And then it encounters a radical ideology. It's basically throwing a life raft to someone drowning in an ocean of identity crisis.
The ego latches onto this rigid bundle of thoughts and adopts it entirely. And if you look at the psychological transformation that occurs in that moment, suddenly the internal emptiness is gone.
Cool.
It's replaced by an enormously strong, practically bulletproof sense of self. The ideology provides this ready-made narrative where this previously invisible young man is now incredibly special.
He's part of the awakened elite who possesses the absolute truth.
Yes. And crucially, it provides a scapegoat. Everyone outside of his specific belief system is categorized as purely evil.
Now, we should pause here for a second because the source points to some incredibly heavy historical examples to illustrate this concept of collective egoic possession on a mass scale.
Right, very heavy.
Specifically, things like National Socialism in Germany, Soviet communism, and Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. And to be completely clear to you listening, we aren't endorsing his historical analysis or taking a political stance
No,
here.
no, not at all.
We're just impartially mapping out how he applies this psychological theory to these global catastrophes. He views these horrors not just as political events, but as periods where an entire population is swept up in a massive, rigid, collective egoic structure.
Yeah, the underlying mechanism behind a radicalized youth on the internet and the mechanism behind a totalitarian state are fundamentally the same in this framework.
What?
It is the ego asserting its fictitious identity by making the other completely wrong, or in these tragic historical cases, entirely evil and worthy of destruction.
The ego achieves its ultimate inflation by adopting a doctrine that justifies absolute cruelty in the name of being absolutely right. Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Okay.
It's basically strapping a pair of virtual reality goggles to your face and completely forgetting you have them on.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You genuinely think you are seeing the real objective world. But you aren't. You're just looking through the program software of your adopted belief system. Every single thing you look at is filtered through the code of us versus them, right versus wrong, good versus evil.
And if anyone tries to take those goggles off of you, you fight them with everything you have because you genuinely believe they were trying to destroy reality itself.
Right. You don't realize they're just trying to remove a piece of plastic from your face.
Exactly. And that VR software has a very specific clinical name in this framework,
Yeah.
a mental virus.
Okay, so we've just explored how these mental viruses can take over whole societies, but let's pivot to how they operate within the individual mind because they really exist on a massive spectrum.
They do.
From the most harmless annoyance to the absolute extreme of severe mental illness, let's start at the mild end. The most relatable version of a mental virus is probably just getting a catchy pop song stuck in your head.
Oh, yeah. You hear a jingle on the radio, and for the next 6 hours, it just loops endlessly.
It's maddening.
That is a minor, relatively harmless mental virus. It's a thought structure that has taken up residence and just refuses to leave. It hijacks your attention. But eventually, it fades.
Right.
However, these viruses can mutate into something much darker. Preconceived ideas about the world can become parasites. They get their teeth into your mind, they won't let go, and they start infecting all the other thoughts around them.
Tolle actually shares a really chilling personal anecdote about a relative of his to illustrate this mutation.
Yeah, he describes a relative who, even when Tolle was just a teenager, was always highly critical of other people.
Always complaining.
But it went far beyond standard criticism. This relative was constantly searching for everyone's hidden evil intentions. Like if they visited someone's house and the host just offered them a cup of tea.
A perfectly normal thing to do.
Right, the relative would immediately obsess, like, why did they offer me tea? What do they want from me? They're trying to make me owe them a favor so they can exploit me later.
It's the confirmation bias of the ego on absolute overdrive. The ego thrives on conflict, so if there isn't any actual conflict happening, it simply manufactures it out of thin air.
And the tragic end to this anecdote is that over time, this critical mental virus grew and grew until this relative actually had to be institutionalized with paranoid schizophrenia.
Man.
The virus completely overtook the host. It became an extreme infection where the brain literally tells you the entire world is populated by enemies whose sole function is to destroy you. What's fascinating here is how the source draws a direct line between everyday, normal egoic traits and extreme mental illness.
Right, because the psychological insight pulled from this tragedy is what completely shifts the perspective on mental illness here. Tolle suggests that even clinical paranoia, this terrifying belief that everyone is out to get you, is actually just a deeply unconscious form of self-assertion.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate ego trip.
It is. When you dissect the underlying logic of paranoia, it actually makes perfect sense in this framework. Think about it. If the CIA, your neighbors, the government, and the mail carrier are all secretly conspiring to follow you, monitor you, and destroy you, what does that imply about you?
It implies that I am the most important, fascinating person in the entire world.
Exactly. It makes you undeniably special. The ego gets a massive, dark infusion of identity.
If it's entirely unconscious process, of course.
Oh, absolutely. The person suffering from this is in absolute agony.
Mm.
But the underlying architecture is the exact same need to be the center of a narrative. It suggests it isn't a difference in kind. It's purely a matter of amplification.
Which begs the question, if a catchy pop song stuck in your head and clinical paranoia are sitting on the exact same spectrum of mental viruses, is there really such a thing as a completely sane mind as long as we are entirely identified with our thoughts?
That is the incredibly sobering diagnosis presented here.
Because if we are all walking around believing the voices in our head are who we are, aren't we all just dealing with varying degrees of the same underlying illness?
As long as you derive your entire sense of self from the energetic entities bouncing around your skull, you are, to some degree, trapped in an illusion. You are caught in a mild, socially acceptable form of insanity. You're reacting to a simulation of the world created by your thoughts, rather than interacting with the world as it actually is.
Okay, well, if we've successfully diagnosed the terrifying reality of the ego, from Facebook phoniness to ideological extremism to paranoid mental viruses, we desperately need the escape hatch.
We do.
If we are all trapped in this VR simulation, how do we break free?
Well, the spiritual path outlined here begins by telling us exactly what not to do. The solution is not to fight the thoughts.
Which is, naturally, everyone's first instinct. I want to get the uninvited stranger off my couch, so I start arguing with them. I try to logic them out of the house.
But you can't argue with them, because the thing doing the arguing is just another thought. Using a thought to fight a thought is like throwing gasoline on a fire. You don't try to take them out one by one. You don't spend decades endlessly analyzing where they came from or why they are there. Doing that just feeds them more energy.
It makes the ego stronger by giving it a fascinating puzzle to solve about itself.
Exactly.
It's basically a house party in your brain. Like, people are arguing about politics in the kitchen, people are crying over their exes in the hallway, someone is singing a catchy pop song at the top of their lungs in the living room.
A very chaotic party.
Right, and the ego tells you that you have to run around to every single room and forcefully kick out every individual guest to find peace. Which is exhausting and totally impossible because more guests just keep walking through the front door.
Yeah.
But we don't have to do that. We just have to notice the sliding glass door at the back of the living room and step out into the quiet backyard.
That's a brilliant way to visualize it. You're standing in the cool grass.
Yeah.
You can still hear the bass thumping from the house. The party is still happening.
The thoughts are still occurring.
Right. But you are no longer trapped inside the chaos. You are the stillness, observing the noise.
How do we actually step into the backyard, though? Like, what is the practical mechanism for finding that sliding glass door?
The goal is to begin paying attention to that which is beyond thought. Underneath the noise, it's described in the text as finding little gaps.
Little gaps.
Yeah. If you observe your mind carefully between one thought ending and the next thought beginning, there is a tiny microscopic gap of pure stillness. A space where no thought exists, but you're still entirely conscious.
You are still awake?
You're still there. The practice is to simply notice those little gaps. Pay attention to the silence between the words. Gradually, as you bring your attention to the gaps, they begin to widen.
Oh, wow.
You realize there is a massive dimension of stillness within you that the ego was just shouting over all along. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it changes everything.
Because true freedom isn't about having better thoughts or more positive thoughts. It is about fundamentally changing our relationship to thinking itself.
Once you connect to that dimension of stillness, true sanity arises. You realize you are the consciousness watching the mind, not the mind itself.
And what happens to the mind then? Does it just shut off completely? Do we become blank slates?
No, and that's the wonderful conclusion of this framework. Once you are rooted in that stillness, the mind goes from being a parasitic, tyrannical master to being a wonderful, incredibly helpful tool.
You use thought to solve a math problem, or build a house, or plan a trip.
And when the task is done, you put the tool down, you return to stillness. The thoughts no longer possess you because you no longer seek your core identity in their narrative.
Which brings us full circle back to the smartphone in our pocket.
It does.
Once you find the stillness, you can actually use social media authentically. Because you no longer need the likes to prove you exist, you can present a true, unvarnished version of yourself.
Right.
Doesn't have to be an endless parade of manufactured happy selfies. Though, I mean, if you actually are genuinely happy, it's fine to post a happy selfie.
Of course. The difference is the attachment. You are sharing from a place of wholeness,
Mm-hmm.
not posting from a place of emptiness seeking a cure. The
Mm-hmm.
action might look exactly the same from the outside, but the internal state driving it has completely transformed.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by looking at the pool in our pocket and how innocent daily habits can trap us in a fictitious identity. We traced how that very same psychological mechanism scales up to infect whole nations with ideological mental viruses, and how it can mutate into severe personal paranoia. And finally, we found the escape hatch, not by fighting the noise, but by slipping out the back door into the silent gaps between our thoughts.
And as we conclude, I really want to leave you with this final lingering question to explore on your own.
Okay.
The next time you catch yourself fiercely defending an opinion in a comment section, or meticulously choosing the perfect filter for a photo you're about to post,
And
pause.
pause.
Just for 1 second, pause and ask yourself, who is the I that is so desperate to be seen right now? Because if you can step back and observe that desperate need, then you are already the stillness watching it, not the ego performing it.
That is the perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As you go about the rest of your day, we hope you manage to find and enjoy a few of those quiet, beautiful gaps in the noise.